Hello. Have you ever wanted to take the characters from the world's shittiest game and put them into the world's best game? Well, look no further, because today, in whatever the fuck I choose to call this series, we are going to take some League of Legends champions and put them into D&D and make them into proper player characters. John. Hang on. Are you trying to tell me that they already made like a book putting League of Legends into D&D? What the fuck? Wait, I don't know what to do. I already wrote the stupid script. Roll the title screen! Alright, now before we get started in turning these Avarosa and Freljordian League of Legends champions into D&D PCs, there's a few disclaimers I have to quickly go over. First things first, I started writing this script before the Legends of Runeterra expansion book came out, so for the purposes of this video, I am going to be disregarding that book entirely, because I do not feel like rewriting half the script, and I have difficulty finding a proper excuse. Next, there will be very little homebrew in this video. I might give you some suggestions on some homebrew options to make your character a little bit more authentic to what you're going for, but for the purposes of this video, I will be giving you anything from official content only and from unearthed arcana that has not been changed or updated or added past this date on screen. All of the PCs that I recommend will be traditional races. I'm not going to make some kind of monster ancient white dragon race for Anivia, because that would in theory be more realistic. I get all my content from dnd5e.wikidot.com because I am a poor college student, just like everybody else watching the video. For each of the champions, I will be listing their race, their class, their subclass, potential feats, potential backgrounds, and some starting proficiencies that would be appropriate for the character. As well, I will be giving a brief summary of what their backstory would be watered down so that it can be used for a lower level campaign. Because as much as I love Anivia, it's a bit difficult to write in a demigod as a PC. It's just a little bit of a chore for the GM. So yeah, anyways, let's get started with these Avarosans with our first champion, Anivia. Starting with Anivia, the most appropriate class would probably be Sorcerer, because, you know, you might be surprised, but there's no Celestial Demigod class. Now, the race is where it gets a bit finicky. You could go with an Aarakocra, you know, you got the wings, you got white feathers. You got Aasimars, which, you know, could also have wings, and then you've got the their relations with the Celestial Plane. But personally, if you want something that is the most visually realistic, White Dragonborn with the dragon wings feet is probably the thing that would be the most realistic in terms of how it looks visually. For the purposes of the token that I drew Anivia as an Aasimar with pure white skin to imply some kind of weirdness about her, because, you know, sorcerers, they're weird, they're born with magic as opposed to learning about it or selling their soul for magic. For the subclass, for the sorcerer class, you're going to want to go with the Phoenix origin. Even though this subclass is closely related to fire, you can literally take the entire subclass, all the words that say fire, place them with ice. Easy as that. Next, yeah, it's because she's a phoenix. Next, for the background. Background is also a little bit weird. So you might be surprised once again there's no demigod background. The one that's most appropriate, I would think, is the hermit background, for reasons that I will get into later on. For feats that would be appropriate, you got Elemental Adept. Great feat for any kind of player character that specializes in one type of magic damage. In this case, Anivia's type would be, you know, cold damage. And as I mentioned before, the Dragon Wings feat, if you decide to make your Anivia a White Dragonborn. In terms of proficiencies that I thought would be appropriate, I went with Religion, Arcana, Nature, and Survival. Those are just some that I pulled out my ass. I figured Nature and Survival would be the most appropriate. But Religion and Arcana, I don't know, she's a god, probably knows about gods. In terms of best stats, it would probably be Wisdom and Charisma for worst stats, Strength and Constitution, just like every other spellcaster. And just a quick note before I move on to Anivia's backstory is that I did have an idea to make Anivia a warlock who unknowingly was her own patron. Because I think that was a really interesting idea, and Anivia is clearly powerful enough to be a warlock patron, maybe a celestial warlock, who knows. That's just an idea that I toyed around with, and you're more than welcome to expand on that idea or toy around with it yourself. Now let's move on to Anivia's potential backstory. Well, we can't exactly have a PC start out as a demigod. There is another interesting part about her backstory that very few people know about. Actually, who the fuck knows about League of Legends lore? I didn't know about League of Legends lore until I started making this video. Basically, she was the first person to arrive in the Freljord, and she acted as a guide to help others arrive to safe locations and to help them survive in the unforgiving reaches of the Freljord. So maybe something along the lines of Anivia was a white dragonborn living in the most isolated and dangerous parts of the Freljord, surviving due to her immense resistance to the cold and her inherent abilities to control snow and blizzards around her. She spent most of her time alone, and on the off chance that she'd encounter another person, she would safely guide them back to where they came from, till one day, when she guided a lost person back to their village, she discovered the rest of the party and continued with them on a mission for the greater good. Something among those lines. And that's kind of why I went with the hermit background. The hermit background is all about, being alone and surviving in the wilderness on your own for whatever reason. I mean, I know that's somewhat similar to the Outlander background, but let's be real, no one knows the difference between the two backgrounds anyway. Now, one important thing to mention here is the whole joining the rest of the party part, because that's probably the most important part of a backstory, and something you kind of have to write with the DM. If you want to just make an entire party of Freljordians, hey, that's great and all, but essentially when I'm giving the backstory, I want to try to give a reason why they would go on an adventure and abandon their current life. So in this case for Anivia, she abandoned her current life simply for the sake of doing something for the greater good, or, maybe she wants to explore the world, or maybe she's tired of her life of surviving in the wilderness and helping others. Who knows? That is entirely up to you to decide, but that is so far what I have. Next, moving on alphabetically to Ashe, the most obvious class race choice for Ashe would be a ranger wood elf, mostly because she has that proficiency with bows. Before becoming the leader of her clan, she was a hunter. Give her that hunter subclass, you can call it a day there. Or, if you want to try something a little bit more interesting, I think it would be really cool to make Ashe into a warlock. Now, hear me out. Ashe was just kind of a normal human being before she discovered that bow, in which case that bow gave her the ability to manipulate ice to do a variety of things, namely, slowing down her enemies with her arrows. Now, what you could do is make Ashe into a warlock, flavor her Eldritch Blast into arrows, make them look like arrows, that is, make it so that her bow is her spellcasting focus, and then take the Eldritch Invocation that makes it so that your Eldritch Blast reduce enemies' movement. Personally, I think that would be great. In terms of subclass, I couldn't really find one that fit perfectly. The closest I could find was maybe Archfey. It really depends on what you want the Eldritch Patron to be. That's something that you can kind of go with yourself. You can make it Avarosa herself for all you know. Don't exactly know how I would classify Avarosa. If you want to go with something a little bit more simple, you can make her a Hexblade. Even though Hexblades can't be ranged weapons, you can talk to your DM about removing that restriction. It's up to you. But it's an interesting idea I had if you want to play around with it. If not, perfectly fine. Ranger, hunter, call it a day. In terms of background, I thought of two possibilities. You got Outlander and you got Noble. Noble because she's the daughter of the War Mother. Outlander because, she travels in a tribe and she lives a nomadic life. Both of those are possible options. In terms of feats, you got the Inspiring Leader one, easily the most accurate because, she eventually becomes the War Mother that unites the Freljord, or at least unites a shit ton of tribes. And then Elven Accuracy because, Elf, she has a bow. Fuck. In terms of proficiencies, you got Survival, Persuasion, Acrobatics, Stealth. Acrobatics and Stealth just because she has a high Dexterity. Survival because realistically every single Freljordian PC is going to be proficient in Survival. And then Persuasion because, Got to be able to persuade the public in order to be a good leader. For best stats, you got dexterity and charisma. Charisma because, you know, unite the tribes. Dexterity because she's talented with the bow. And then the worst stats, probably constitution and strength. If she's a ranger, could probably switch out that constitution for something else. I just didn't feel right making her intelligence the dump stat because, you know, she is the daughter of a noble, or at least of a prominent figure. I feel like she'd have a decent education. I mean, nomadic lifestyle. I don't know. Up to you. But personally, this is what I feel would be the most appropriate. It's a bit awkward to have a low-level PC also be the war mother of a tribe, so let's go with Ashe a little bit early on in her lore. If you want to go with the noble background, maybe something along the lines of Ashe was the daughter of the Avarosan war mother, she was expected to be next in line, but for some reason she could not accept that title. Maybe at the end of the campaign she didn't accept that title. Maybe she does some kind of great deed for her tribe and thus garners support for, you know, being nominated for that title. But for whatever reason, it's a bit weird to lead a tribe during the campaign, so you're going to want to try to find a way for her to not take on that title. In terms of her bow, maybe she started her quest following a map that she stole / was given by her mother. In the lore, she was given a map by her mother, and that's how she found the bow. If you want to go with the ranger subclass, maybe make it a +1 bow or something. You could make it something cool. You could make it an ordinary bow, and then maybe partway through the campaign it could get enchanted with something. Or maybe she starts the campaign with an ordinary bow, and then eventually finds that cool bow. Maybe that map is a story arc or something. If you want to go with the warlock or the sorcerer, personally I think warlock would be better. Make the bow the source of their arcane power, or their connection to their patron. Now, all you have to do is find a reason for them to meet the rest of the party. Maybe, you know, like with Anivia, greater good. That's always the easiest way to get your party together. They go on a mission for the greater good. But with Ashe, it's a little bit more complicated. It's probably going to be linked to the reason why she does not accept the title to be the leader of her tribe. Next is Braum. Now, Braum is an interesting one because I really found 2 different subclass options that would be appropriate for Braum. In terms of the first one, I was thinking maybe he could be a barbarian with the Ancestral Guardian subclass. Even though Braum's not exactly known for his rage, the idea of protecting his allies from damage is, you know, that's his bread and butter. That's the shit he does, and that's exactly what the Ancestral Guardian Barbarian subclass is all about. Or, if you want something a little bit more literally appropriate, you can go with Fighter, and go with the Interceptor fighting style. That shit's cool. Make him a battle master, give him goading attack. Excellent. In terms of race, I feel like the most appropriate race would be Goliath. I mean, he's a big guy, he's strong. I really didn't want to make every single character a traditional humanoid. So, Goliath. I just think that would be cool. Obviously, you can do whatever you'd like with the race. He's human normally, so up to you. By the way, if you couldn't tell, I'm going to be saying up to you a lot in this video, because that's what D&D is all about. Leaving things up to the player to make their own adventure. It's literally the game where you can do anything. In terms of background for Braum, I originally thought Hermit, but personally I think it'd be more appropriate to make him a folk hero. Even though you can't exactly make him into some kind of legendary being who has done impossible feats of strength and his stories are told to young children everywhere. Maybe he can be that at the end of the campaign when he's like level 19, but it's pretty difficult to make that into a low-level PC. So instead of that, we're going to make him a more traditional folk hero, I think, but more on that later. In terms of feats that would be appropriate, Shieldmaster and Sentinel, both of them are pretty obvious. If you want, you can take Tavern Brawler, even though Braum doesn't seem like the most violent person when he's drunk. Definitely, I don't know, maybe you would find that interesting. In terms of proficiencies, you got Athletics, just because, you know, he's a big guy, probably very athletic. Animal Handling, because he was a farmer. Intimidation is a bit weird, but maybe he can be intimidating in the right moments. And then, of course, Survival, because you need proficiency with Survival to survive in the Freljord. Best stats, Strength and Constitution, easily. Worst stats, Intelligence and Dexterity, maybe Intelligence and charisma. I don't know. Intelligence is there for sure, though. In terms of dexterity, I feel like it would be the worst because he's always got to lug around that big shield, but clearly he's strong enough to still move around really quickly with it, so who the fuck knows. In terms of his weapon, it's a bit weird using a shield as a weapon, but it's probably not too difficult to homebrew. That's something you'll have to talk about with your DM. Also, in case you couldn't tell, that's something that you're going to have to talk about with your DM is also going to be said a lot. Because even though these characters are really cool, and I do like the idea of playing them as PCs in an actual D&D campaign, they're not exactly built for D&D. They're built for League of Legends, which is a battle of fucking gods, and also Spiky Turtle. In terms of Brahm's backstory, it's a bit much for low-level PCs, so let's oversimplify it. Instead of being a legendary hero who goes on mystical adventures and whatever, let's just make him a normal farmer. He likes to farm dairy, because that's actually what he does. He lives by himself and he farms dairy. He herds bull nukes for a living, and he's really well-liked in the village he lives in, and is an amazing storyteller at his local tavern. He lived happily until maybe there was some kind of threat. I don't know. Give him something that makes him into a folk hero. Or maybe he doesn't even have to do a deed to become a folk hero. Maybe he's just known as that guy that will always help people no matter what kind of situation they're in. Is just jolly. People love him because he's just a great guy. Who knows? But maybe something along those lines. That would probably be the easiest way to make him into a low-level PC. And then, of course, find a way for him to meld with the rest of the party. Maybe, I don't know, greater good. Greater good seems to be the easiest one to go with. Just go with greater good. Be lazy with that, because people forget that that's actually a really important part of our backstory. But, whatever. So Gragas is a weird one, because personally I think he's best suited to be a dwarven monk. And I know that that's an odd combination for Gragas specifically, but this is mostly because of his, lack of armor, as shown in every depiction of him. And also because monks have the Drunken Master subclass, which I personally think would be very appropriate for Gragas. If you want, you can make him a barbarian, but as you'll find out soon, a lot of the champions on this list could be fitted to be barbarians. So I'm going to go with a dwarven monk. I'm going to give him the guild merchant background, because Gragas is clearly very well versed in the aristocratic studies, and the reason why he's in Avarosa is because he wanted to make a trade deal with Ashe, because he wants to use their ice for his alcohol. That's actually why he's part of the Avarosan tribe. It's a true story. In terms of feats, I think the durable and tough feat, perfect for him, because his whole thing is about the fact that he gets so drunk that he can't feel pain. That's what his W is all about anyway. Tavern Brawler, perfect feat for him. Give him Resilient so he has proficiency with con saves. Boom. Simple and easy. Proficiency... Persuasion? I had a really tough time thinking of proficiencies that would be good for him. Persuasion, because that's what you get from the guild merchant background. Athletics? Something? I don't know. Make his best stats, strength, and constitution. And I know it's weird not to have dexterity as the best stat for a monk, but it's interesting making dex his dump stat. It's, doesn't have to necessarily be good, but it has to be, accurate. If you want to make a good Gragas as opposed to an accurate Gragas, don't make him a monk. But I'm going for accuracy here, and obviously dexterity is going to be his worst stat, or at least not one of his best stats. Plus, strength monks, perfectly viable. You can, for your unarmed strike, you can use your dexterity or your strength, and constitution for obvious reasons. That's why you take the tough and the durable and the resilient and all that jazz. Gragas' backstory is actually pretty similar to his lore. He's from parts unknown. Gragas was an alcohol connoisseur who loved nothing more than a good drink and incredibly intense tavern brawls, till one day, after an intense night of drinking and fighting, Gragas decided that he wanted to brew the stuff himself. He doesn't need a reason. He's not a man who requires reasons. Who the fuck do you think he is? So he sets off on a quest to find the ingredients required to create the ultimate brew, eventually leading him to the Freljord. Now the real challenge is finding a good reason as to why he's with the party, since the usual because they're doing it for the greater good doesn't seem too realistic for the character. Maybe he's become really good drinking buddies with one of the PCs. Maybe there's rumors about a legendary ale that leads him in the same direction as the rest of the party, so it agrees to, scratch their back in exchange for them scratching his. Who knows? But that's basically it. Gragas doesn't have that much lore, even in League of Legends. So, it's up to you. Feel free to add more stuff to it. But for the most part, Alcohol Connoisseur wants to find the ultimate brew. That's about it. Alright, so next up is Nunu, and I'm doing Nunu and Willump differently, just because I think it would work better. So, Nunu, you're going to go with the class of Druid, and then for races, just any of the short races would work. Personally, I think Halfling is the most fitting, either that or Gnome. Nunu doesn't exactly seem like a dwarf to me, but, I think a Halfling would work. In terms of subclass, you can either go with the Circle of the Land and then choose the Arctic subclass, or you can go with the Circle of the Shepherd. Personally, I'm leaning more towards land, but, Shepherd is also fitting. In terms of background, I'm personally going with Outlander. Folk Hero also makes some sense because, a Folk Hero is what he is striving to become by, defeating a Yeti. In terms of feats, that would make sense. Lucky's a good feat. Give him Mountain Combatant. That could be cool if your DM is, pretty loose about what counts as a mount. Just make Willump into, count as a mount, and then make him a mounted combatant, even though he doesn't really use normal weapon attacks as a druid. I mean, you got Shillelagh, that's about it. Elemental Adept, make those ice spells a little bit stronger. Warcaster, just because it's a good feat. In terms of proficiencies, you got Animal Handling, Survival, and Nature for, obvious reasons, because everyone in the Freljord has to have Survival. In terms of best stats, probably Wisdom and Dexterity. In terms of worst stats, Strength and Intelligence. Simple as that. So just a few quick notes before we go on to Nunu's backstory. Originally, I was considering making him a Beastmaster Ranger with Willump as the animal companion, but I decided to scrap that for a few reasons. First one being the fact that Nunu doesn't really use weapons like bows or swords like, traditional rangers do. And also the fact that if you want to make Willump an animal companion, you're either going to have to go with a bear as your animal companion, or you're going to have to homebrew some kind of Yeti companion. In terms of the source of Nunu's magic, it's not from education, and it's not from manipulating nature. In the lore of League of Legends, it states that Nunu got his magic from a crystal that essentially allowed other people to see dreams. So, if you want, you can make him a druid, Circle of Dreams, or you could make him a sorcerer, to reflect that. But personally, I'd definitely go with druid. In terms of his possibilities of being a bard, because Nunu is clearly proficient with the flute, if you want to go with the Outlander background, you can get proficiency with an instrument. That's pretty cool. Plus, I didn't find any bard subclasses that, really fit. Plus, Nunu doesn't really seem like that much of a bard. Maybe he could be a storyteller bard. He does know a few stories. Now on to some backstory. Did you know that Nunu had lore? Neither did I, and that shit is surprisingly long. Basically, Nunu is a child from a nomadic tribe within the Freljord who, after much bullying, because he liked the flute, and the flute is for bitches, he ran away from home looking for a beast because he wanted to be a hero. Because he's also an orphan. He's looking for his mom. That's important. After getting lost, he found Willump, who was a Yeti, and Willump really liked him because they had cool snowball fights and they played some cool songs, and also for something that I'm going to explain in Willump's lore. Basically, now they are traveling across the Freljord looking for his mother. In terms of why he would join the party, I mean, it's pretty fucking obvious. He's a child. He has no direction in life. He's looking for adventure. He wants to be a hero. I mean, it'd be pretty difficult not to put him into the party. And now on to Willump. That's right, I'm breaking alphabetical order for the sake of making myself feel better. So, moving on to Willump. In terms of class, he would probably be a barbarian. He doesn't exactly fight with any kind of technique like a fighter would. And now for race. This is where things get a bit complicated. In terms of race, you could homebrew a Yeti race. But personally, I think the easiest way to get a Yeti race would actually just to take the Leonin race and just kind of reskin that, call that shit a Yeti, and then call it a day. There you go, easy as that. Could go with a Minotaur, but personally I just think Leonin, reskinning that into a Yeti would be the easiest way to get a Yeti race. In terms of Barbarian subclass, go with Beast, because that shit's cool. In terms of background, you could go with Hermit, for reasons that I'll explain in Willump's backstory. In terms of feats that would be fitting, Tough, sentinel because he likes protecting things, as I'll explain in Willem's backstory. Tough just makes sense because, you know, he's a big, bulky Yeti. Go with athlete, that's also a pretty good one. In terms of proficiencies, you got athletics, survival, and intimidation. Survival because everyone fucking needs survival. Best stats, strength and constitution. Worst stats, intelligence and wisdom. He's a barbarian. Just a standard barbarian. No bullshit around. Give him some decent charisma so that he's good at intimidation, or, you know, if you want to use the variant rules and just use strength as the intimidation modifier, that's also fine. Give him a bit of dexterity, because he's clearly dexterous. He has 4 arms. You could do cool things with 4 arms. But, I mean, worst stats, intelligence, wisdom, best stats, strength, and constitution. Now, Willem's backstory is already pretty well suited to be a D&D PC. It's a little bit intense for a low-level PC, but I still think it's pretty manageable. Essentially, there was once a thriving tribe of Yetis living in the mountains of the Freljord. At least they were thriving, before they were killed by a cataclysm of ice known as the Blinded One. It was Lysandra. All but one Yeti survived the attack, a Yeti who had sworn to protect the last remaining piece of magic that remained from his tribe, a large gem that could project the dreams of any mortal. He protected it, like you know, Knuckles, the akin to how he protected the master is Willem is Knuckles. And the real original Riot, until he was approached by a small child named Nunu. Initially, he was going to kill the child, like some kind of fucking monster. But after the gem had shown the Yeti all of Nunu's dreams, the Yeti hesitated as he was entranced by the fantastical tales that he had seen. After the gem was finished, the Yeti realized just how lonely he was. He had no family or friends. He didn't even remember what they looked like or what their names were. Hell, he didn't even remember his own name because he's that fucking stupid. That is, until Nunu offered him a hand of friendship, and the gem had sent all of its magic into Nunu because it could just do that shit, I guess. So now the newly named Willem travels with Nunu as they continue their quest to find Nunu's mother. And last but not least, there is Tryndamere. In terms of class, you're going to want to go with Barbarian for really fucking obvious reasons. In terms of race, I was thinking either human or half-orc. Human because, you know, their whole thing is about determination. Half-orc because they get relentless endurance. In terms of subclass, I was originally going to make him a berserker. But after looking into his lore, I found out that Tryndamere is surprisingly religious. He actually worships someone called the Tusk Lord, who is all about, you know, doing battle. And apparently his sword is supposed to look like a tusk or something. Either way, making him a zealot would be fitting for that reason. And also, if you pick the zealot subclass, you get you get Rage Beyond Death, which essentially allows you to keep on fighting even though you have 0 hit points as long as you can keep your rage up, which personally I think that is fucking perfect for Tryndamere. In terms of background, you're either going to go with Noble or Gladiator. Tryndamere isn't actually a Noble until later into his lore, and also he's not a Gladiator until later into his lore, but personally I just think that those two would be the most fitting, because I really didn't want to just make a bunch of Outlanders, because that shit would be boring. In terms of feats, you want to take Great Weapons Master, and if you decide to go with Human Determination, also pretty fucking good. For proficiencies, you got Athletics, Acrobatics, Intimidation. Those shits are pretty good. Best stats, Strength and Constitution, or you can go with Strength and Dexterity. Both of those would be fitting. In terms of worst stats, Intelligence and Charisma, maybe even Intelligence and Wisdom. Up to you, but personally, Tryndamere just doesn't exactly seem like the most charismatic person. Now it's time to move on to Tryndamere's lore. So Tryndamere's backstory is actually pretty similar to his League of Legends lore in the beginning, but then you kind of have to make a twist at the end. So initially, Tryndamere was living in his village, which primarily consisted of hunters and warriors, till one day his tribe was visited by a dark and ominous figure. Believing that the figure was an avatar of the Tusk Lord, people began to approach him and kneel in respect, which the figure respectfully responded by murdering the entire clan. Tryndamere had attempted to kill the figure, but it was far too powerful and Tryndamere was instantly defeated, but not killed. Tryndamere had awoken up, as if revived by rage, with a burning desire for revenge. However, there were other survivors and he needed to find somewhere safe to take them. So he and other survivors traveled to lands occupied by the Avarosans in hopes of incorporating into their society. When they got there, the Avarosans rejected them, so he fought in gladiatorial battles in hopes of earning Avarosan protection for his clan, which the War Mother Or, in this case, if you want to alter the lore a bit to match with Ashe's, in which Ashe was able to convince the War Mother to grant them that protection. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky, because normally he would marry Ashe and become the champion of Avarosa, but that's a little bit much. So perhaps he fell in love with Ashe, or he felt like he owed a debt to Ashe, so he decided to leave the tribe for the same reason she does. Or maybe she leaves the tribe and Tryndamere feels obligated to follow her, and so they travel together. And that is all of the Avarosans turned into D&D PCs without the use of the Legends of Runeterra expansion. Let me know in the comments if you liked the video, what other League of Legends factions you want to see, anything else that you'd want to add into this video, perhaps other ideas for how to create other characters or how to properly play them. And if you want to see more of this content, make sure to like and subscribe. I also have a few other D&D videos planned if you're interested in that sort of thing. And with that, I wish you all a good night and sweet dreams.